Oh my
Oh my
gosh.
goodness.
Nelvin, where are you? Are you in the New York area?
I am. I'm in Brooklyn. I'm in Brownsville.
Oh, Brownsville. Oh, wow. Right where we did our
But I
training
did work with we
couple years
did
ago.
work. I did work with John Melvern at Van Dyke Community Center for a whole summer, working with the young boys, teaching EI. So
Oh, that's real great.
Yeah, it was great.
Great.
And Fritz worked with me at the Northside Center 20 years ago. No, sadly, 30 years. I think 30 years ago.
Yeah, more than that. Yeah.
About 30 years when we were young adults in school. And we did a karate program in East Harlem at the Northside Center for Child Development.
Wow.
Yeah.
You guys have been in it.
A little bit.
I guess it's safe to say.
Yeah.
We as a matter of fact, I don't know if you guys saw the video of the young lady who was tossed to the ground
Yes.
by the officer.
And she had a seizure?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, my son sent me that.
And so, update, the officer has been fired.
Okay, good.
And the captain who was walking, we thought it was a sergeant or a lieutenant. The captain who was walking behind him has been removed from this particular precinct. He's been relocated. That happened within the last 24 hours.
this is in Brooklyn.
This is the 73rd over by my church.
Oh,
That
yeah.
was in your district, in your area. Okay.
Yep. East New York and Thomas Boylan.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's right there.
That's right.
Wow.
Literally.
Wow.
So, we're in the thick of it. As a matter of fact, on my way up after work today, I ran into the I guess he's going to be the new commanding officer or the interim at that precinct.
Mm-hmm.
And there were protesters out front until they found out that this gentleman has been removed and this officer fired. They dispersed immediately. That's how simple it was. I'm so glad that these group of protesters were calm enough to understand that what they did got the job done.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And at the end of the day, that's what it is. We want our protest to produce something other than, repair and restoration. And I mean, listen, I think the insurance companies must be losing their minds right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
They must be losing their minds because Minnesota, California, Georgia, New York City, Philadelphia, all over the place, stores are getting destroyed, Targets, Walmarts. It's a horror story for the insurance industry, which is something that we also have to consider in the long run when it comes down to the wider conversation. Because what does recovery look like after we've replaced the windows,
Mm-hmm.
after we've fixed the doors?
Right.
What does it look like? I don't know if you guys knew that somebody got away with an ATM today out of a Bank of America lobby.
Mm.
Really?
Last night.
Yeah.
Whole ATM.
Say that again?
The whole ATM. That's
The entire thing. The entire thing. Not something from the corner store, but the actual Bank of America, the Bank of America ATM, that little slot that they have there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate because some people are, the looting and the destruction is not about the protest. They're taking in different directions, distracting from the important message here.
Absolutely.
And the vast majority of protesters want to be peaceful, but want to make a voice heard and want to see actual action. And that's the key. Action is the response that is needed. This is a dialogue, it's a discussion.
And I think that's that has to be what guides this dialogue, right? If we that has to be the centripetal force in the entire conversation.
Mm-hmm.
If change, progress is removed, then everything it's like the axis of the earth, right? If that's pulled out, this ball will go anywhere it wants to go. And I think that if we take our mind off of change, and I think that's even a great way to pivot into EI, right? If we take our mind off of change, your emotions can take you in any direction.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Right? if you take your mind off of what it is that you know that if for example your self-awareness, if you notice that you're in a bad state, the focus needs to be changed. If not, we can end up anywhere our emotions and our the variables in our lives take us. So I think it's a valid conversation to have, by and large, outside of protesting, just in general for our society.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
I agree.
So the motivation for change occurs when we're in crisis. It's usually what brings somebody into a therapy room. They're in pain, they come, they want to change. Let's say they start to feel better, that's when they want to drop off. This society, historically, after the headlines died down and the protesting stopped, we revert back to no change. Well, how are we getting out of this?
Right.
And 400 years of that no change, or not enough change.
Right.
Especially the last 50 years. Some progress, yes, but not enough change. And that's why I think the emotions are even more intense. It's not just George Floyd. It's all the accumulated
Hundreds of years.
murders over all these years.
And I think you add the pressure of quarantine in a global pandemic, and this becomes the perfect cocktail for crisis, and therefore it becomes the perfect catalyst for change.
That's a great point.
That's a great way to look at it, Nelvern. That you see it as a catalyst for change. I know the quarantine is a huge factor. We've been talking the last several episodes of how coping with the COVID crisis, and that certainly has have a double crisis here, adds to it. But this issue of race goes beyond. I mean, even if there was no COVID crisis right now and it was business as usual, it would be just as horrific and just as terrible. But COVID adds to the intensity and to the heightened emotions.
Without question, man. I think because again, for many, remember, 70% of the country did not know anyone who died nor was infected by COVID. And so of the American population, of the 300 or so million that live in the country, you're looking at round about a little over 200,000 that don't know anyone or have been affected by know anyone that was been affected or died from COVID. So they've been locked in a cage for 3 months for in what in their mind is nothing, right? And so the conspiracy theories made more sense there than it did to us here on the East Coast, especially in New York City. And so you add that mounting pressure, the frustration, not being able to go to work, right? The stores that the stores that you could go to were filled with people, and you now have new rules that you're not used to, right? Masks, and you can't talk to people the same way. You go to the corner deli or to the Wawa, and now there's like a glass there. It's almost feels like we've been caged in every way, shape, or form. And then you add the fact that we witnessed what happened to Ahmaud Arbery, right? Then you sandwich that with George Floyd, but in the midst of that, you have Amy Cooper, who we watch on camera literally try to weaponize the police. Something was going to happen. Something was going to happen, and like I said, it becomes the perfect cocktail for crisis, but yet it becomes the right catalyst for change.
Is it fair to say, in therapy, John, Fritz, Pastor Nelvern, is it fair to say in therapy, in counseling, that in order to grow, sometimes you have to be at your lowest moments, or the medium of a vehicle of therapy and counseling, it helps you to articulate what you're feeling or face what you're feeling so that you can go low to pick yourself up, right?
People are generally most motivated for change when they're in pain and when they're at their lowest. People don't generally call me when they're feeling great and they want to keep on feeling that way.
Right.
I think they should, but they
So
don't.
I think collectively, that's kind of what.
In the addictions counseling world, they have a term hitting bottom. Someone with an addiction hits bottom, and that's often the catalyst to enter a 12-step program or into therapy. When you bring that from an individual level to the societal level, have we hit bottom? I felt like we hit bottom so many times before. Where is the bottom of this? And the other end of this metaphor is that, well, the other side is not listening. At least in therapy, therapists tend to be empathic and compassionate and are listening and are understanding what the person is trying to say. The government and the police force and the larger societal institutions are not listening. And that is what amplifies this crisis.
A long history of not listening. There's a long history of suppression of what we have to say, totally ignoring it, marginalizing it, not giving it an opportunity. So when therapy is facilitating the person to express themselves, and they're often motivated for that process. But our society, when things get bad, we actually cancel things that are there for expression. We close the libraries, the museums, the music programs, the youth programs, especially the inner city youth programs. We don't put money into that stuff, and society always devolves after they've done that.
That I think is huge. And so for me, outside of pastoring, I kind of coach people. I coach creatives in that sense, and I work with creatives and try to help them pull what it is that their form of expression may be. And one of the things that resonated with me so much, because literally, even when I deal with children, one of the first things I do is, hey, pick up a pen and just draw what you feel. As a matter of fact, when they're not willing to talk to me, so I've been a youth pastor for quite some time. I actually started a youth ministry back in 1991. And one of the things I will say is the best way to get them to talk is to not talk. Let them express themselves in a creative way, and they begin to speak through whatever that medium may be. And so that struck a chord with me to know that, yeah, society closes off the opportunities for expression beyond verbalization, or that is not verbalized. And I think that's key to know. And I thought about that myself, driving around, looking at the libraries, looking at the PALs that's been closed. Right now, we're working out of a food distribution center that is the rec center in Brownsville, right? And so now the National Guard are there. All the parks in New York City are closed. You can't just go express yourself, right? There's no running and jogging unless you're at a larger park like Prospect Park. But that's a major thing, right? That they can't express what they're feeling through creative means, and therefore many people are forced to fit into one or a few other ways of typical expression. And for many people, they don't know how to do that well, right? They just don't know how to do that well.
And I like what you said, Melvin, that you don't say much when you're working with the youth. You let them express themselves. You're listening, though. You're present.
Absolutely.
And that's a key factor, because if someone's expressing themselves on deaf ears, it doesn't have the same impact for that person. Where the kid is doing a drawing or a creative artwork or writing something or speaking something, the expression needs to have that reciprocal side. That's the idea of a relationship. Someone else at the other end of that relationship needs to be receiving what is said. And so your presence is so important for those young kids that you work with.
So that leads me to something I was going to wait for when we are officially recording. And I like the idea that Fritz is recording right now, because I'm thinking we could either take it and have it for a second podcast, or we can keep talking and have our podcast be that, and when we finish talking, we can introduce the guests, even though that's not really the official way of doing things. But we have such a flow. You know, we could officially start, but I want to say something which I was going to bring into our official recording. Talk about expression. The first psychologist, black psychologist, to be elected president to the APA, American Psychological Association, was Kenneth Bancroft Clark.
Yes.
He did a study where the end result was that children of color were choosing dolls, white dolls, okay? And the 1954 Supreme Court decision, that helped the Supreme Court decision in 1954 desegregate, because they saw that there was an inferiority complex that came about, right?
Absolutely.
Now, there are many people who are proponents, there are many people of color who feel that desegregating was detrimental to people of color. But I'm going to take this to another place, right? If these children chose these dolls, which didn't look like them, and that says a lot about what's going on unconsciously. That says a lot about how they viewed the world, right?
Internalized racism.
That is correct. In the same respects, I know who my friends are. I have friends from different backgrounds. You know, the reason why we're friends, I have friends in different backgrounds because they've been exposed. Okay, so let me put that on the table. But in the same respects, imagine being the dominant culture or dominant race. How does the world look to you? And do you unconsciously, or we can say unconsciously, you may develop a superiority complex unconsciously, right? But the point I'm making is that it's a deep issue, this thing. You know, some people are just hateful. They raise their children hateful, and that's it, end of story. Okay? But you have situations where they don't raise their children hateful, but society treats you differently. It's just a part of the society to be treated differently because of where you're at in the society, you know? So I think there are a lot of different unconscious processes that are taking place with different groups and different races, and sometimes we don't even touch on those things. Those things don't even come up for discussion as much as they should. And Diane Sawyer, some years back, did the same thing with the dolls. And the Asian children chose blonde-haired dolls. So what is that saying about young people or about media and images and how we should view empathy, EI, you know, the world, you know, what's real and what's not real, you know, perception, and how it relates to us getting along better in the society and the world.
These are really important studies, Paul, that you mentioned. Incidentally, Kenneth Clark and his wife Mimi founded the Northside Center for Child Development in East Harlem, where Fritz and I worked about 30 years ago. Wow. We taught martial arts in an after-school program there. So yeah, he's very famous, very well known, and that study says a lot. It says a lot, and I think your point is well taken, that people who are not black or not brown or not people of color will not have that perspective. It's hard for them to empathize and fully understand. Maybe some people could empathize because we're all human, but they cannot understand the institutionalized racism that has been pervasive throughout society.
And I think that, and I mentioned this to you before, John, that I would love to put together some podcasts and we kind of go a little deeper with EI and cognitive behavioral therapy. And I think if we really want change, and you know, you can't change some hearts, but if you really want to change and use EI and use CBT to transform lives, we have to get into that psychology and use those studies to help groups understand, entities, corporations, law enforcement, paramilitary organizations understand biases that they probably don't even know they hold, because they'll tell you that I didn't grow up racist, my family never, you know, but there are other things that affect you, that have affected you into your adulthood that you don't even realize.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or, not you, but you know, people don't realize.
Right. It's implicit bias.
Correct.
Only recently has been spoken about. I think Hillary Clinton might have mentioned it in the 2016 campaign. It was the first time a high-level politician mentioned implicit bias. Because I was like, oh my God, psychologists have known about this for decades, and it's certainly an underlying psychological dynamic with regard to racism, and finally someone spoke about it.
Right, right. So the question now is, what are we going to do with that? It's the first time a politician mentioned it. Said a high-level politician mentioned it.
Aware of.
As far as we know, as far as we're aware of, right? So now, what are we going to do with that? Can we use that and take that? Can we use it as a weapon for good or change?
Well, I would say, I mean, again, since we're bringing everything here in the podcast through the lens of emotional intelligence, it takes a great deal of courage to step outside of your comfort zone. And part of the problem is that many police departments do not want to admit that they made a terrible, horrible mistake, or that there's failures in the institution, in the structure of how things are designed. They're afraid to say that, though it's glaringly true.
Right.
So that fear prevents the people in leadership with power to acknowledge that. Politicians also have the same fear. They don't want to admit there's a mistake or a serious problem. Yet, I was impressed this last day or two on the news, 2 different police officers, one in Genesee County, Michigan, near Flint. He said, we're putting down the batons, we're taking off the riot helmets. What do you want us to do? How can we work with you? He said, march with us. So they marched together. The police officers marched with the people. Not one arrest, not one person injured, not any property damaged. He stepped out of that. That was courageous.
Absolutely.
And another police chief in Houston did the same thing, talked with his people. He said, we built a great relationship with our community. We're going to continue doing that. So these are instances where they're speaking out and saying, yes, what happened in Minneapolis is unacceptable. It's bad. It's wrong. It has to change. They have the courage to do something that's very unconventional and maybe uncomfortable. But that kind of emotional intelligence is what facilitates change. And that's bringing a change from within the system.
Right. Right.
So I would like to just say very quickly that we, to the audience or our viewers, that we would like to introduce our guest today. We went with the flow because this is such an important topic. So John, do we want to introduce our guest and keep moving?
Well, I'll introduce Dr. Gillette, who's our clinical psychologist in practice in New York. You, Paul Edwards, founder and director of the Emotional Intelligence Urban Initiative. And Paul, I'll let you introduce Pastor Nelvin because you know him better. And we're very pleased, and thank you, Pastor Nelvin, for being our guest on the podcast. And I'll let Paul introduce you.
Yeah, so Pastor Nelvin Samuels is my guest today, and I'm very honored to have him here. We've done some podcasts together. He's been very strong in the community, in the Brownsville community, where his ministry is. And Pastor, I don't have your bio memorized, so it's John. Do you have it in front of you? Do you want to tell us a little? I'm sorry, I memorized it for the next podcast, but now.
No need, man. That's all I need. That's all you need to say, that I'm here. My church is in the hood, and that I serve the hood. That's really how I describe myself, and it's my honor.
I think we've taken. I like to say to the viewers, we've taken an orthodox start, but I think it's natural and it's holistic, and we're going to keep it moving.
The conversations have been flowing all day with so many different people, and I think the way we entered this podcast is probably respecting where people are. People are talking about this, and all too often we're not talking about it enough. So welcome to the pastor for being here. Welcome for serving the community. You are on the front lines, and would love to hear about what those front lines look like right now.
Man, to be very, very honest, and again, thank you for the invitation. To be very, very honest, at least where I am, we've been working on, as it pertains to EI, one of the most important things that people need if we're going to go psychologically is we're going to start with Maslow, right? We're going to talk about the hierarchy of needs. And I think in this situation, we've noticed, recognized, and had to acknowledge the fact that people were concerned about their basic fundamental needs, right? And so we can't even talk about self-actualization if folks are concerned about security and food, right? Folks are concerned about shelter because they're not working and rents couldn't be paid. And there's some snake landlords who are still pressing for money when folks aren't working. And so one of the first things we did was we started to focus on one of the needs that we knew we had access to, which was food. And we began to work. And one of the things that we've noticed is that when we begin to deal with the food and we're talking to folks, we're recognizing that there's so many underlying issues that were there before COVID-19 that needed to be addressed. And we have an opportunity now as small as with things as simple as conversations to kind of help folks wrap their minds around what they're dealing with. And again, I think people were in such survival mode prior to COVID-19. There were folks who were literally living paycheck to paycheck before COVID-19. So to take away paychecks forced them to come out of even self-awareness, right? And we understand that that's the most important part of emotional intelligence. And because many people have gone into desperate survival mindsets, who has time for self-awareness? Like, honestly, I don't care what I feel like as long as I can get some food to take home for my kid tonight. And so that's what we've been dealing with on the front lines. And now to add the explosion of the George Floyd story and this case, and even the different backstories that we've heard about him, it's created another thing where folks are online now, not just talking about COVID-19. It almost feels like COVID is gone. Now they're talking about the systemic racism. You're getting into these conversations, and and we're standing there saying, who would have thought that folks thought like this? They were so used to just going on day to day and jumping from one survival situation to another. We now realize that these are the concerns of everyone. It wasn't just the rioters. It's not just the protesters. These issues matter to everyone. It's just that it was never coming up in conversation, or they felt like it wouldn't be heard.
So there's a history of pre-existing conditions that lead up to now. And I've been getting questions from people asking, is there anything they can do? Like, this is something that just started when the Floyd incident, the Amy Cooper incident. What they're doing is showing us that there's something going on here that's been going on for now centuries.
Right.
And now we're at a critical time in the country where we're under enough pressure, long enough, turned away from all our entertainment and our distractions, that we can focus on it. So now the populace is activated. And we're doing this because we want to make sure that we utilize this activation for change.
Totally. The major piece, I think, as it pertains for me on the front lines as a religious leader is concerned, is that I always have to remind people that Jesus was a young Black man or a young man of color who was taken in by authorities and killed in front of his mother. While they didn't have cell phones back then, someone had a pen and paper. And we had the cell phone to see what happened to George Floyd. But in essence, we have the Gospels to hear what happened to Jesus. And if we're going to look at the scriptures from a social justice perspective, I liken Jesus to every young Black man or every young Black woman who was killed at the hand of authorities. And I say, you can't separate the two. And when you bring that into perspective, I think there is a level of awareness that is increased. And when you sit back and you look at the story that way, and you hear it that way, they're more willing to hear a preacher talk about social justice because I'm not stringing words that rhyme together and close it with no justice, no peace, but I'm actually forcing you to think about the Bible story and see it from a perspective that makes sense to you in this day and age as it pertains to this particular subject. And I would probably say 9.5 times out of 10 am able to go into a deeper discussion, because when you think about it from that perspective, it makes sense.
Certainly. I heard a minister say once that Jesus was a socialist, and certainly he would have embraced social justice for sure. And
Absolutely.
And that's when you think it back, it goes beyond 400 years. It probably goes through human history of struggles of one group oppressing other groups. And so it's a pretty awful history when you think of it. And yet there's a tremendous resiliency and strength. I mean, if you look at the African-American community in the United States through the eras of slavery, through the 20th century, I mean, there's a tremendous resiliency as a community to bounce back and to try to overcome the continuous barriers. So there's a lot in that story.
Absolutely. I think Michelle Obama said it in the book Becoming, that grief and resilience live together. Mm-hmm. And I think that's key, even for me, through this, that while I may be hearing all the hard parts of the story, I know that if I can gather myself, and whoever I speak with can gather themselves, through the stages of emotional intelligence as well, that they can tap into the resilient part of, or the resilient side of grief. I think, again, they're two sides of the same coin, believe it or not.
What is some of what can come from tapping into that resilience? And I'm thinking about this in the flavor of what can we do? A few episodes back, John, you were talking about how the word crisis also in another language means opportunity.
Danger and opportunity in Chinese.
In Chinese. And so our opportunity in this crisis is to tap into the resilience and tap into other things that we can talk about that could result in a longer lasting process of change. A process that usually dies down with the headlines going down, but we're not going to let that happen, are we?
No, we're not. I think you said it excellently, Fritz. But I have to say what was very difficult for me, particularly this morning, was I watched a TED Talks on the 15 best talks on emotional intelligence. And one of the doctors was a Dr. Joan Rosenberg, and she discussed the same things that we are discussing now, of how to be resilient. And you become resilient by leaning into the discomfort. And what was difficult for me was, as someone who is trained and whose purpose is to teach EI and elevate individuals with EI, and my colleagues here, all of you, counsel, therapy, those are your specialties. What was difficult for me was she mentioned a list of emotions that we need to learn to lean into. And they were sadness, shame, helplessness, anger, vulnerability, embarrassment, disappointment, and frustration. And what impacted me was all of those words can reflect someone being impacted by this killing. I'll read it again: sadness, shame, helplessness, anger, vulnerability, embarrassment, disappointment, and frustration. And so what bothered me was I felt overwhelmed in how can I help others? Can you imagine trying to instruct someone in leaning into sadness, shame, helplessness, anger, vulnerability, embarrassment, disappointment, and frustration, and telling them that this will help you to become stronger? So I'm thinking the pastor can resonate with those words, those descriptions of emotions, and there probably people in these crowds feeling these, a mixture, a combination, sometimes all being in the same space, feeling this admixture of emotions. So what can I say?
I think to take what you're saying and add it to what Fritz mentioned as it pertains to this not being a short run. This is something that we have to be prepared to discuss for a long time. We're going to have to be prepared to deal with for a long time. That if you're looking at resilience, resilience is simply seeing a situation and saying, in spite of, I'm still going to go. In spite of, I'm still going to do. In spite of, I'm still going to get there. And so you have to be able to fight through what it is. And so the term that we use is grit, right? Every Rocky movie, right? And literally every Rocky movie, that's what we see. They pretty much wrap grit up in a hoodie, and he runs down some street in Philadelphia. Even the Creed movies, right? And the reason why this is important is because grit forces you now to prepare yourself to get up when you can't. And leaning into sadness and shame helps build the stamina, right? If one of the things that I've learned, and I'm in my own personal fitness journey, weight loss journey again, is I recognize that in the past, what I did was quit when it hurt. And what happened was I rewarded myself, believe it or not, I rewarded myself for quitting. It was how I felt pleased. And so I got to the gym, it hurt. I ran 2 miles, and I planned on running 3, and I was ashamed that I didn't hit my goal. And as a result, my coping mechanism was two coffee mugs of ice cream, let's just say. All right. And so now I got this butter pecan ice cream, and I'm enjoying this butter pecan ice cream. And I said, you know what? Oh man, it sucks that this happened to you. And while I'm on it, I'm feeling myself be frustrated at the fact, one, that I didn't hit the goal, but two, rather than saying I'm gonna have some water and go to bed and try it again tomorrow, because I didn't have the grit, I said I'm gonna reward myself with something that I know I should not have, right? And so, for example, for the person who's ashamed, the reward for themselves is calling someone who's going to engage them in the pity party. Mm-hmm. Is that, and so what happens is we don't feed that grit, we don't feed that passion. And so to say lean into those things are absolutely important. When I feel pain, when I go to the gym now, or when I work out now, it's like, what was that? I'm going to try it again and determine how I can make it through this motion, this exercise for the next time, because the mere fact that it's exhibiting weakness. And so as I've been teaching our people as of late, that crisis is a classroom. And my last lesson was, there is a point to your pain. And when pain comes in your physical body, it's coming to tell you that something is not right. Something isn't there. And so you've got to listen to those things. That shame, listen to it. That sadness, listen to it. It is guiding you to a place where you can be free in your next season, the next part of your life. But you got to open the door when it knocks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, let me help you with that list. What you said makes a lot of sense. We have to, that shame, that sadness, that helplessness, that anger, that vulnerability, that embarrassment, that disappointment, and frustration, right? Yeah. I just wanted to highlight that. And I also would like to say that we're gonna take a vote, but you've inspired me that we should make the Rocky theme song the official theme song for the Conversations in Emotional Intelligence.
There we go.
There you go.
I'm here for it.
But that's powerful.
I just want to jump and say that was a wonderful description that you just gave.
Oh, wow.
A wonderful description of emotional intelligence in action, in daily life. It was excellent. It was right on target. And we have to probably finish up in a couple of minutes here, but yeah, that was really great.
And I'm glad it resonates. I think because at the end of the day, I think for me, I don't know about anyone else, even at my lowest weight, I attach the thing that caused me most pain physically. I use it to abuse myself, and that was food. And so I used food to abuse myself, even though I knew that it was what was bad for me. I knew, and of course, I didn't have no one ever says, oh my gosh, I'm frustrated, I'm gonna go have a kale salad. No, I want a burger, I want cheese fries, right? Because it is now me now kind of coding what I'm feeling. And it's important that we recognize that oftentimes we coat what we feel, we skim over what we feel, and do the exact opposite of what we should do. And so we have to employ a growth mindset when it comes down to what you mentioned, Paul. Like it's why basketball players look at game tape and football players look at game tape. What did I do wrong? It's not a loss, it's a lesson, as they say. What did I do wrong? How, it's necessary as it pertains to the future, because if you're not careful, you'll waste an opportunity in your pain, in your frustration.
And I like how you said before, crisis is a classroom.
Yes.
It's a great phrase.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I just want to say that I think this was a beautiful discourse, and I personally would love to have you back. And this is an issue, this killing, and I'm going to say killing, this murder is something that we need to keep pressing. And I think the discourse was great, and I would love for us to do this again and keep pressing. The group of us.
This course is so important to have. A short story is that when I was doing a radio program with WWRL, AM station.
I haven't heard that in a long time.
Right. John Pelletieri was one of my guests on one of the episodes, and it was a live call-in show. And the show aired on a Friday night, 10 or 11 p.m. Talk about a time when an AM radio, you could probably guess that not too many people were listening.
Right.
But yeah, each episode was a different topic. John was on the episode about emotional intelligence. At another point, I was doing an episode on racism. And we have 10 phone lines. And usually during a typical Friday night episode, 1 or 2 lights light up during the course of the program. When I did one episode on racism, all 10 lines lit up, and that's when we actually found out people were listening. Because each call could represent 10,000 people. And I remember we were doing a 2-hour show and the lines were lit up the whole time. This society is starving to have this conversation, even though we tend to lean away from it. It's in need of this conversation. And the conversation will lead to action if we do it long enough, but there never seems to be enough time to talk about it.
Well, to build on that, Fritz, someone asked a question earlier, how do we keep this going? Because once the headlines fade, the topic goes to the back burner. It's about leaning into the uncomfortable emotions. We use the mood meter in other episodes, so the complacency is calm and relaxed, and we're in the green zone and everything's okay. Complacency is dangerous here. Then this pattern will repeat again. Mm-hmm. We have to lean into the red, the anger, the fear, the worry, the concern, the sadness, the grief. We have to lean into the unpleasant emotions and keep them alive. Do not let them be forgotten, so we can have these pertinent and engaged conversations on all levels in society until we achieve institutional change.
So our trigger is change. That is our trigger.
There we go.
That's our bottom line.
Absolutely. It's the only constant. So why would we go anywhere else?
So on that note, maybe time to wrap up. Thank you again, Pastor Delverne. We really appreciate it. This has been episode 6 of Conversations in EI. And we have shifted from the COVID crisis to the George Floyd murder crisis and the protests around that and issues of racism in the United States. But there have been many other countries around the world where people have been protesting in support of Black Lives Matter. So we're very happy to see that and hear that. But we will see you next episode on another relevant topic of using emotional intelligence. So thank you very much. And you could find all the episodes on the website, www.emotionalintelligencesociety.org, on our resource page for the International Society for Emotional Intelligence. So thank you very much.